The gospel that you just heard today, the story of Jesus healing the disabled woman on the Sabbath, brought back some long ago memories for me. It made me think of Mrs. Kretschmer. I hadn't thought about her in years. When I was a child, Mrs. Kretschmer was a widow who attended our church along with her adult son who was disabled in some way. I never knew anything about her husband, and I only vaguely knew that she was an immigrant from Germany. When or how or why she immigrated was beyond what kids were told in those days. I was a little scared of her. She was very formal in her manner, spoke English with a heavy German accent. I do remember that she was very fond of my father, who made a point of saying a few words of German to her after the service every Sunday. All 18 German words he knew, I think. I tended to keep my distance. She just seemed, severe. She would look up at you with piercing blue eyes and just the faintest of smiles. I think it was a smile. It seemed friendly enough, but she just looked like she wouldn't tolerate much shenanigans from a kid, and kids tend to back away from adults who don't look like they would tolerate shenanigans. Now, I say that she would look up because, like the woman in this story, Mrs. Kretschmer was profoundly bent over her cane. I do remember that I wondered if it hurt to walk like that. I now know, of course, that it most certainly did. When I thought about her this week, I realized with kind of a start that in all probability she was younger than I am now. But her fate was to live before titanium joints and disc replacement surgery and medications for osteoporosis. I know now that her life could not have been easy. So when I hear this story we heard today, it's old Mrs. Kretschmer that I see walking into that synagogue bent over her cane. And it's truly a lovely thing to imagine that Jesus put his hand on her and tells her that she is set free to walk upright and look people in the eye. Now, as you heard, Jesus got into some trouble for doing that. It turns out that Jesus and the disciples tended to get into, frankly, quite a bit of trouble on the Sabbath. This woman was not the only one who he healed on his Sabbath day. There was the man with the withered hand, the man with dropsy, he was going to die from it. There were others. And once the disciples were so hungry on the Sabbath that they picked some grain and rubbed it between their fingers and ate it, and they got in trouble for working on a Sabbath. Always, it seems, there was some Jewish authority, or more often some Pharisee, hanging around to tell Jesus that what he had done was wrong because it had been done on the Sabbath. Now, we studied those stories in Sunday school. We studied those stories in the religion classes at our parochial school. And I say studied. We didn't really discuss the stories. Our teachers made it clear what we were supposed to think. So actually, these were really easy exercises. In all these stories, Jesus, of course, had done the right thing. Nobody in the class would ever side with the Pharisees. Come on. Because in all the stories, the Pharisees or other Jewish leaders were trying to defend the indefensible, those silly laws about what you could do on the Sabbath, and they were just wrong. End of story. The problem for me is that I look at those stories now and I think we missed a lot. First, that easy condemnation of the Pharisees, of those silly Jewish laws, was frankly part of the ongoing training in Christian anti-Semitism. Let's be honest about that. It was subtle, and I suspect that after World War II it was also more polite, but it was still there. The impression that we were left with was that Judaism had a bunch of rather stupid rules, and that made it a faith unworthy of our attention. Besides, they didn't believe in Jesus. And so in a story like you heard today, if we kids ended up thinking that a good Christian, that is Jesus was not a Christian, but of course that's what we thought, had fixed all that, I don't think the impression was accidental. And there's more. Of course, this is a story about a woman relieved of 18 years of misery so she could stand up straight and look at her community. But what comes after that healing is not an argument between a Christian and a Jew over the Sabbath. It's an argument between two observant Jews about what the Sabbath was for, what it meant. Okay, the minute I wrote that last sentence, I thought, oh no, this is going to be trouble because it sounds like I want to do some esoteric wandering about in the weeds in terms of Jewish theology, and I so hate it when you moan during my sermon. I get it. We don't obviously take the idea of the Sabbath as particularly significant. We just don't think about it much, do we? I mean, it's Sunday, and we're here, so we do take seriously the idea that this is the day you go to church. But I'd be hard-pressed to believe that any of us have some stringent set of things that we simply refuse to do because it's our Sabbath. We'll cook, or mow the grass, or go to the grocery store. We'll grade papers, just not quite yet. We'll finish that spreadsheet we've been working on for the office, or change the oil in our car, or weed the garden. Maybe we'll just head to the mall for a bit of shopping. All of those old Sunday blue laws, you remember those? If you have to be old to remember those. The laws that nobody under a certain age can remember are enforced no longer. Everything is open for business on Sunday, including the liquor stores. No, we don't have any rules about what can be done on a Sunday, and we don't pretend that we should. So, what does this story have to do with us? Maybe we need just a little teeny walk in the weeds. The rabbis who've been writing about this for the last 2,000 years point to Genesis and the end of the account of the creation. I looked it up. This is what it says. On the sixth day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. God hallowed the seventh day. God made the day holy. The rabbis point out something you're not likely to notice unless you're looking for it. After the creations on days 1 through 6, God pronounces what has been created as good. But God does not make those things holy. Not the light, not the seas, not the mountains, not the stars, nor the beasts, nor the fish, nor the plants, not the humans. They are all good, not holy. What God makes holy is not a thing. What God makes holy is time itself, the time of the seventh day. The holiness of that shows up in the fourth of the Ten Commandments. And in fact, it acts as a pivot point between those commandments. Number 1 through 3 are about what you must not do to God. Numbers 5 through 10 are about what you must not do to your neighbor. And between those two parts is number 4. And in Deuteronomy, it's the longest commandment. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember, you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. You know, I read that and said, this last part seems like a kind of odd addendum to the commandment. God brought you from slavery to freedom, and that's why you're commanded to keep the Sabbath day? What? But think about it for a moment. Gathering in the freedom of God's holy time was a reminder to the ancient Hebrews that their God had set them free. A freedom that they didn't literally have. They certainly didn't have it under Pharaoh. They certainly didn't have it under Rome. But God meant for them to be free. And the point was that when they were gathered together in God's time, they were free. This is the source of the argument that Jesus has with the synagogue leader. For the synagogue leader, the Sabbath was a list of thou shalt nots. You keep the Sabbath by not doing things. But for Jesus, the Sabbath was about God's freedom. That's why he stands next to the healed woman and proclaims, ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day? What better time was there to join with one's community, to look them in the eye, than during God's holy time of the Sabbath? And so maybe this story has a meaning for us that isn't quite as obscure as it seems. Here we are together. And this gathering is sacred. It is not this space that makes this sacred. It is not the homes of those of you on Zoom that make it sacred. What is holy is this time together, this precious moment with each other and with God. This time when we share each other's burdens and each other's joys and take our prayers to God. This time when we are invited to lay down everything that troubles our days. This time when we share our earthly treasures with each other. What is holy is this now. When if we're quiet enough, we can feel all of God's time, past and present and future, all at the same time. Right now, this time, when we can know that the great cloud of witnesses that came before us is with us, when we can often feel the presence of lost loved ones, lost spouses, lost parents, lost grandparents, and Mrs. Kretschmer too. And on my good days, I can even imagine the presence of St. Paul. This time looks forward as well. We just blessed our children's backpacks, knowing that we go with God's blessings, they go with God's blessings, and they go with all our hopes for the future as well. Abraham Heschel, one of the greatest of the 20th century rabbis, put it this way when he spoke of the Sabbath and this holy time. There is, he said, this realm of time when the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. This now is that time. This is the realm of eternity. My friends, may we honor its holiness with all our being. Amen.